cinema. Movement, kinetics, kinesiology, kino, it's all about the moving image. Hence the name movies. But more specifically, cinema means the art of the moving image. And if Scorsese's attitude towards Marvel movies remains true,
the value of a film that's like a theme park film, for example, it's not cinema, it's something else.
Then it seems some movies can truly be artistic, while other movies just miss out on that it factor. But the seemingly pedantic rivalry between sophisticated cinema and roller coaster cinema actually points to the only important question that needs answering. Before we can debate the importance of Goodfellas or Endgame, of Shawshank or Batman, of Citizen Kane or Dune, we must first ask, can movies carry artistic meaning at all? Of course, if movies are art, then we must further figure out what that artistic it factor truly is. Only then could this feud between frivolous entertainment and cinematic art be actually engaged with. But more importantly, if we can't confidently place film's best works alongside the likes of Van Gogh's, of Picasso's, of Shakespeare's, or of Michelangelo's, if there's any room for doubt, all film would have to resign to being nothing but entertainment. The stakes are truly dire. So today we will be conducting that investigation to discover cinema's true birth, to discover cinema's artistic potential, if any, and to discover if true cinema even exists. So as my guiding star, I'll be referencing the first chapter of this book, A Philosophy of Cinematic Art by Berys Gaut. These aren't exactly my original ideas, but I'll be sharing it in my own words. Now, one reason these questions are so pressing is because cinema is so new. With the other art forms, they have this ancient history that immediately shroud it in this mysticism. Its storied history helps ground them as these artistic phenomena. But cinema isn't afforded this luxury. Yet somehow, even with its brief history, it too has developed its own little mythos. Now let's forget for a moment that we've been surrounded by this kind of tech our whole lives. Let's take ourselves back to 1895 in the heart of Paris. A crowd of unsuspecting audience members shuffle into an auditorium, and as everyone settles in, a duo of enigmatic artists, the Lumiere brothers, announce their new artistic innovation. Murmuring and sighs meet their enthusiasm. We've heard this kind of talk before. Every artist thinks they're the new thing. But then the lights go out. Pure darkness envelops the crowd. Yelping in a mix of incitement and fear, audience members seeing this train barreling towards them desperately leap out of the way until they laugh in relief. Then their relief turns to awe. They've witnessed the world's first projected moving image. This unbelievable, this unforeseen momentary rush of magic. It's innovation at its finest. It's a virgin world blessed by artistic genius. It's the birth of something novel. It's not true. You've likely come across this story of audience members actually believing a real train might be heading straight towards them, all because it was so new and magical. But this story is entirely apocryphal, or at least almost entirely apocryphal. The truth? The world's first public screening wasn't in an auditorium, but the basement of a local cafe. They didn't play footage of a train, but the brothers played 10 short reels back to back, 10 continuous shots, no editing, just regular old footage. But these minute details aren't what's important to me. Instead, it's the tone of these exhibitions. Absolutely none of this was ever poised as artistic. In reality, it was just seen as a silly gimmick. For one, this revolutionary tech was built on the foundations of literal children's toys. Its precursors, the magic lantern, the zoetrope, the praxinoscope, they were just low entertainment, gadgets and tricks, but definitely not art. Thomas Edison even threw his hat in the ring with the kinetoscope, this hulking machine that whirled its still frames into movement, but that still was evocative of a technological wonder rather than an art piece. My point is that not only was it actually true that audiences saw the Lumiere brothers' invention as a new technological gimmick, but it makes sense that they did, given they were primed to see this just as another piece of fun tech, a variation on the toys they had already seen. A modern day comparison would be like experiencing VR for the first time. It's this wonderful new illusion that we can lose ourselves in, yes, but as it stands right now, it'd be a little crazy to call it an art form. It's just lacking the substance to take it beyond being a gimmick.
Viva Italia, per favore, mezzo.
So just like how you and I can imagine the inventors of VR one day implementing transformative, artistic experiences within this new medium, we can see how film just needed some artistic minds to give it the substance it was missing. But at its outset, the moving image's artistic potential was such a non-issue that even that attitude was absent. The inventors of film, the Lumiere brothers, never had that art in mind. They never even had entertainment in mind. They aspired not for an artistic revolution, but a scientific revolution. Obviously, we've already brought up Thomas Edison's involvement in film's development, and even the very first live-action film with the praxinoscope was to observe a horse's gallop. Of course, the world's first moving image was just for Leland Stanford to settle a bet, a little side project. But more importantly than those guys was with the Lumiere brothers themselves. We've already seen how the Lumiere brothers' first reaction wasn't to take the cinematograph to art houses, but it actually wasn't to go to theaters either. Their first thought was to take their invention to scientific conferences. At the time, the projected moving image was being discussed in the same vein as the X-ray, as this potentially huge development in scientific understanding. So when the Lumiere brothers achieved this final technological leap, they excitedly toured it to other scientists around the world, and they were met with disappointment. It wasn't as revolutionary as anyone expected. So with their tails between their legs, the brothers returned home to Paris. They flippantly set up their first public screening, they charged for tickets, and they garnered a measly 40 people to attend. When the lights turned off, they expected their time to be for nothing. But then they saw the crowd's reaction. The public was thrilled, not for its science as the brothers first hoped, but as entertainment. Profit flashed in their eyes and they shifted strategies. They spent the next few years showcasing the technology around the world, squeezing every dime out of it as they could because at the end of the day, they believed that this craze wouldn't last. Eventually, they abandoned their cinematograph as a technology with, quote, no future. They wrapped up their last shows and they set their eyes to new horizons, to start back at square one, not as entertainers, but as scientists once again. People often cite this moment as the birth of cinema, but let me be a bit pedantic for the moment. If cinema means the art of the moving image, then this period was by no means its birth. Artistry wasn't in the conversation, both with its audiences and its own inventors. Therefore, this might be the birth of the cinematic medium, of its use in simple entertainment, but if we're here to find the birth of its art, we must move forward. Forward to when this gimmick was filled with substance. Forward to the Hollywood boom. You had the earliest narrative films like Count of Monte Cristo and In Old California, then the movie boom of the Roaring '20s, then the introduction of the first talkie with the jazz singer.
You ain't heard nothing yet.
Then the studio era's peak in the 1940s. The musical was born, the Western was born, the seductive film noir, and the modern epic Citizen Kane. This was decades, nearly 50 years of legendary storytelling.
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
Undoubtedly, cinema now demanded respect, not as a science nor a gimmick, but as an art that could transport you across space and time, an art that could force you to tears, an art that deserves praise. But actually, none of this proves much at all. I won't deny that these stories can be heart-wrenching, the acting can be transformative, but none of that makes cinema an art. That's just theater. And cinema just presents that theater more conveniently. Another way to put this is this. If you sit down, put on your favorite CD of Mozart's greatest hits, and you say, man, this sounds amazing. This is a work of art. And I said, yeah, music is amazing. And you turned to me with all sincerity and said, no, not music. CD is amazing. I think we'd all agree something's off here. Obviously, what you're enjoying here is Mozart's music and his composition. It's a mistake to think that the CD has anything to do with the actual art. Instead, the CD is what records the actual work of art, which is Mozart's writing and the musician's performance. In this same vein, Roger Scruton, a philosopher of aesthetics, wants to compare cinema to the CD. They're both dependent on what they're recording, and what they're recording is the real work of art. So when you might say that No Country for Old Men is a work of art, Scruton wants you to think carefully. Are you referring to the acting? Are you referring to the story? If yes, well, you're probably not talking about cinema. So earlier when we went into this Hollywood boom craving a substance that could make cinema artistic, and when all this epic storytelling began, it just intuitively became clear that art was beginning to be created. But Scruton's undeniably right. You'd be a madman to argue that the photo of the Mona Lisa is a work of art. Roger Scruton argues that you'd be equally flawed to praise a movie for its story and performance. If I set up a static camera on a tripod, plopped it down right in front of a stage, then recorded the entire production of Hamilton, well, I think you would be insane to say, wow, what a masterful film. I'd argue that even with the actual very expertly produced recording of Hamilton, you'd still be a little strange to attribute your laughter and tears to the film rather than the theater. It's all in its writing and its performance. And that's the thing. What's fascinating about cinema is that most movies do have other art forms in it. Beautifully written dialogue, Oscar-winning acting, evocative music. And Scruton is right, none of those arts can be what defines cinema. There has to be something else. So here's where we need to refocus. We've been looking for the birth of cinema, the introduction of the moving image's artistry, but this seems to assume that it's a concrete historical event that we could point to. The reality is there won't be one movie that unlocks this artistry. Instead, the artistry is better put as a potential written into film itself. So let's set aside film's history and let's hone our sights on film. Let's take out story, let's take out acting. What does film involve? And does that actually involve artistic choice? Well, Roger Scruton unsurprisingly says no. If we're dialing in on film, then we gotta investigate its core, photography. Scruton argues that photography can't be what's called a representational art form. A representational art form is a medium that allows its artist to try depicting something real, but at the same time, a medium that also allows its artist to deviate from what's real. So imagine you're Da Vinci in the midst of painting the Mona Lisa. In that moment, there are three things at play with one another. The subject being the real woman Da Vinci aims to paint, the artist being Da Vinci, and the actual piece of representational art being produced. As Da Vinci paints, he looks at his subject, consciously thinks about how he wants to depict her, and he makes a deliberate choice to either match what she looks like or depart from what she looks like. Therefore, when you and I go to the Louvre to admire his final product, we can find ourselves intrigued by how Da Vinci chose to represent this woman. Did the woman look exactly like how she's depicted? Maybe generally she does, but then look at the color palette. The soft shades of greens turn to blue and brown turn to red. Why might Da Vinci choose this specific palette? But also look at the absence of vibrancy. The colors feel dull or only barely warm, and she lacks any rosy undertones. She's this unusual kind of pale. Take a step back now. This kind of restricted color palette isn't realistic. So then what did the real Mona Lisa look like? Why would Da Vinci choose to warp reality in this way? Was this just his style that day? Was he just running low on paint? Or was he trying to tell us something? Yes, Da Vinci could have totally been on autopilot. He could have not thought deliberately or consciously about each choice he made. But the fact that there's a potential for him to intentionally choose to depart from the real, that opens the door to all kinds of intriguing artistic appreciation. Van Gogh takes the same dynamic to even crazier heights. He does something we can call aesthetic transformation, to take something that in the real world evokes a specific emotion, but then in choosing to represent it differently, it transforms it into evoking a completely different emotion. For example, he brings out joy in something as depressing as his messy bedroom. Or he stretches nature's magnificence beyond the mundane. Or he evokes beauty against his isolating existential despair. He captures the world in unforeseen ways, all by exercising his choice to express the world as it seems to him, or maybe how he wishes the world seemed, or for any reason that you and I might imagine. And that's the point of representational art. The viewer just can't help but engage with what this artist is trying to communicate through all those intentional changes he can make in representing his subject. This kind of artistic engagement is crucial for something to be a representational art form, and we can see it in sculpting too. There is a really impressive technical ability behind the statue of David, but what was Michelangelo intending here? What does Michelangelo imagine David thinking? Why depict him before his battle with Goliath instead of during or after like many other artworks? Because Michelangelo was intimately involved with every choice, every careful chisel, we can lose ourselves in investigating what he might be trying to tell us. Naturally, all this talk about representational art begs us to ask, can a photographer engage us in that same way? And Scruton, after thinking carefully about this dynamic, believes they're just not afforded the same kind of choice that makes painting or sculpting representationally artistic. Scruton argues that yes, in photography, there is this paradigm between the artist, the subject, and the final representation. But as the photographer, the supposed artist, you just don't have enough control to actually make meaningful differences between the subject you're capturing and your representation of it. He says it's just self-evident. Once you click that button, the photographic process is out of your hands. The physical light bounces off your subject, causes a literal chemical reaction in your camera's film, and boom, you have your photo. It's cause and effect. It's mechanical. It's out of your hands. What step during that process do you, the artist, get to actually introduce your perspective, to intervene? Let's make this even more clear. Imagine a painter like Van Gogh, and let's imagine he actually hallucinated those swirling skies and bright colors. Let's say he's on drugs or he's some sort of schizophrenic. While the real objective world is as ordinary as ever, from Van Gogh's perspective, that swirling sky is real. So when Van Gogh paints from his hallucinatory perspective and aims to capture it exactly as he sees it, the final painting will reflect his perception. On the other hand, imagine Van Gogh hallucinating that same night sky, same as before, but instead of being a painter, he's a photographer. In every outcome, his perspective is absent. No matter how hard he might try, all he'll ever depict is the real world, the non-hallucinatory world. And that's all he'll ever be able to convey to his audiences. This inherent inability to fill your photography with your vision is a huge problem. It strips away this whole dynamic that we've been talking about. Photography is just so mechanically tied to capturing the real world, we, the artists, can't intervene on that process. So it just can never match the art of real representational art forms. But this feels misleading. What about multiple exposure photography? I mean, just a brief glimpse at these photos evokes profound emotions, and you can't help but wonder what these photographers are trying to say and how they mold their subjects. How could Scruton look at these beautiful portraits and still deny photography's potential? Well, he actually concedes here. This kind of photography is representationally artistic, but you have to admit, this isn't the kind of photography most people think of. See, we're trying to figure out if things like portraiture or landscape photography, the sort of bare bones photography alone, can be an art form. No matter the kind of painting you do, no matter the kind of painter you intend to be, there's always this potential for representational interest. But the same might not be true for what we'll call ideal photography. A single snapshot developed naturally with no editing in post. It doesn't require artistic intervention in the same vein as a true representational art form. But now you may be yelling through your screen saying, I seem to imply editing in post could make it artistic. And once again, Scruton actually agrees. CGI seems to be fertile ground for representational art. VFX artists have this almost infinite ability to create things that don't exist, to add in their own Van Gogh-like hallucinations. And honestly, I do think CGI has so much untapped potential to be profoundly beautiful. But then maybe that's the art form, CGI. The photography and film underneath it has nothing to do with representation at all, because the photo just shows the real world exactly as it is. Once again, we have to be careful not to engage in the transfer fallacy. So we have to set CGI aside as well and refocus our attention on the ideal. As demonstrated with our hallucinating artist example, when you see a photo of something, you know that thing had to have existed, roughly how it's depicted. There exists this logical ontology. this certainty in what's depicted being real, and that certainty is constraining. A painter can reshape reality to fill despair with joy, to make the ordinary a celebration, or to pervert symbols of strength and humanity, to fragment and mutilate, to cry to the world that something needs to change. Picasso took our unified world and broke it apart into a hauntingly beautiful attempt to motivate peace in the face of modern horror. That ability to change reality, it's what gives artists their voice. It's what creates profound meaning. And photography is constrained to the real. Photography is stuck with what is. Photography is not artistic. Here's where I have to confess that I've had countless conversations trying to convince people that movies are way more artistic than they're given credit. I hear that ever-persistent attitude that movies are just entertainment, akin to those toys of the past, and it bothers me. How could people miss something so obvious to me, something so moving? How could people be so oblivious? The meaning, it's just there, right? It has to be. But today, I feel that scrutiny turn back against me. Scruton's right. I can't transform reality. I can't swirl the night sky. I can't express my vision, my perspective, because I'm tied to the real world. I could write those evocative stories. I could move people in just the way that I've been moved before, but that's not cinema. There might not even be such thing as true cinema. But that just can't be it. I've seen films take the real and bring out something more. I've seen an array of colors imperceptible to the naked eye. I've seen shapes twisted beyond what's real. I've been tossed into absurd worlds. I've been imbued with closeness, with vulnerability, unencounterable in my own life. I've seen anxiety, I've seen dread, I've seen joy, and I've seen death. I've seen things unable to be seen, all through watching these supposedly strictly real films. And I've seen that in photography too. Any actual photographer knows that it's not as simple as light hits film and everything is out of your control. You can toy with all sorts of variables, the shutter speed, aperture, type of film stock, and these choices give the photo a whole different feel from the real world. But even more importantly, realize for a moment that the reality we see with our own eyes isn't objective. Our eyes are forced to see the world in specific dimensions. It's our biological limitation. But a photographer's camera lens can twist reality beyond our restrictions. Suddenly, a super wide lens warps its subjects in such a way that isn't far off from Van Gogh. Except, unlike Van Gogh, this is the real world. And that should be celebrated. A macro lens evokes such delicate intimacy with what's real in ways we never get to see. A telephoto lens flattens our environment, crowning us in an environment we may not usually feel so overwhelmed in. And these kinds of choices extend to how a photographer sets up their photo. Obviously, the photographer can't physically chisel his subject, of course, but stark changes in lighting evokes a completely different kind of feeling. There's a reason The Godfather lighting is so popular. It's because it just strikes you differently, different from the real world, and in effect, it does chisel your subject how you please. The photographer can physically fill the frame with symbolism, or they can choose to empty the frame in isolation. They can center the subject along a number of symmetrical lines, or they can choose to offset it awkwardly. Just as we might ask why Velázquez would include the symbol of a dog, or that shadowy figure haunting the background, we can similarly ask why Helmut Newton chose to dress the women and undress the men. Why include the flowers? Why pose them in these ways? Or even at a more simple level, why did Yusuf Karsh pose Churchill in this way? What is that trying to communicate? And interestingly, why does it inherently communicate such bold strength? My point with all of this is Scruton just doesn't realize how all of these choices actually do shape reality in the same representationally artistic ways as an art form like painting. Where a painter can fundamentally twist his bedroom into an absurd composition, so too can a photographer through set design and a host of I already know how Scruton would react. He'd say that we're placing all our artistic value in designing the real world. But what does this have to do with photography? It's the transfer fallacy again. The artistic choice I'm nominating here is about the art of design, and posing is just the art of performance. Even more narrowly defined, live performance art is the art being captured here. Photography is just a means to spread this art more conveniently. It's just like a CD of Mozart. The photography isn't a necessary part of the artwork. I do believe Scruton would have to concede somewhere. I mean, we still have our choice of lens, of film stock, and black and white photography, but it's undeniable that we're much more restricted than the aesthetic transformation possible in painting. Painting can open our eyes to the unreal. Painting can warp the familiar beyond familiarity. Painting elevates us beyond our physical constraints. Photography just reminds us that we're stuck to it. But the fact still remains. When I watch certain movies, when I look at certain photos, I feel elevated beyond the real. It doesn't feel right to diminish this feeling all to the transfer fallacy. It doesn't feel right to restrict film to simply reproducing reality exactly as it is. And maybe we don't have to resign to that fact. Yes, Scruton's right. Maybe there is this mechanical causality that's unavoidable, this logical ontology, this dependence on the real. But we've been assuming that because photography is dependent on reality, that we'll always end up reproducing it exactly as it is. That our final products will be practically an extension of what's real. And that's just clearly not the case. German film philosopher Rudolf Arnheim flipped through Scruton's thinking, noticed this assumption about reproducing, and ripped it to shreds. Really, we're reproducing reality with no discernible difference. Arnheim laughed at this. It's so dramatic. If the movies we watch were exactly like reality, then how come audiences always know they're watching a movie and not mistaking it for the real world? If movies actually reproduce reality, audiences watching a horror movie would run away in fear at the sight of the film's axe-wielding murderer. Yes, this is a bit pedantic, but it points to how obvious it is that the final product we see is not so obviously just the real world as Scruton might argue. Movies are confined to a flat two-dimensional rectangular frame. In the real world, reality extends beyond what's right in front of us. It has depth, but an audience member would be quite silly to try to discover more movie behind the screen or outside the frame. Similarly, it'd be silly to try to smell what's on screen or to touch what it depicts. Arnheim back in his day had even more obvious differences to pull from with the black and white and silent films of his era. Without live sound or color, it becomes all the more self-evident that what we're observing is very different from reality. So Arnheim wants to point our attention to all these inherent limitations, that the movie you watch is limited in matching reality exactly as it is. This is where Scruton might respond by saying, so what? Maybe, yes, a movie isn't exactly reproducing reality, but that doesn't change the fact that a filmmaker can't meaningfully represent anything in the film medium.
You serve absolutely no function whatsoever. It's pathetic.
Well, this is where it gets interesting. In investigating if there's any representational art in film, where Scruton works forward from his mechanical causality argument, Arnheim instead works backwards from these self-apparent limitations. Arnheim has clearly noted that there are always differences between the movie we see and the reality it captures. Therefore, there has to be ground for a filmmaker to artistically represent things that movies inherently can't capture. I know that was a bit of a mouthful, but take a look at this silent sequence and how it chooses to express something silent film can't capture: sound. Back in 1921, this was an awesomely artistic innovation for how to express something you can't inherently capture with film. The filmmakers saw this limitation, creatively worked through it, and found an interesting way to represent sound. So one form of artistic representation is in attempting to represent something that film just can't capture. But there's even another artistic capacity thanks to limitation. Without the advent of color, filmmakers can work through this limitation in amazingly creative ways. What sort of aesthetic can they evoke with just black and white, with just dark and light? All of a sudden, because of these inherent limitations, filmmakers are given this beautiful gift to be super expressive in ways that are fundamentally different from the real world. These are Arnheim's favorite examples of film's limitations, but you might have already noticed that now we do have sound and we do have color.
Yeah.
If you want to take it further, we even have 3D and virtual reality, which both transcend movies' rectangular frame, that other limitation we were talking about. So do all these advancements make movies less artistic, less of an art? Arnheim says yes. He thought that because we're inching closer to perfectly capturing reality, these advancements are actually setbacks for the artistic claim of movies. The closer movies replicate reality, the less limitations for filmmakers to play within or play around, and therefore, the less artistic potential. What Arnheim calls for here, what he demands from film, is a return to this less advanced film, a return to what many might find intuitively archaic. And truthfully, I just can't go along with that assertion. Take In the Mood for Love. Director Wong Kar-wai is near universally praised for his beautiful use of color across his films. He creates this tone of nostalgia through the arrays of saturated colors that ooze across the screen. And the way he pairs these nostalgic moments with equally evocative soundtracks, it's just unmatched. But beyond introducing the art of music to film, sound design is one of the most underrated aspects of filmmaking.
Just wish we had it in time to use against the Germans.
The way the recent Dune movies create the most unique sounds that vibrate your chest alongside its imagery, the way they'll delay sound to create these expressionistic, dreamlike moments. I mean, it's undeniable. This just is art. Yet Arnheim still stands firm, even while our intuition says otherwise. So where does he go wrong? This is where Gaut creates a more refined version of Arnheim's theory. Once again, Arnheim's focus on film's differences from reality is absolutely on the right track. But to try to define them in terms of limitations seems off. Instead of trying to leap to limitation, let's go back to noticing what we're truly interested in here: film's difference from reality. Well, today we have color films, which are closer to reality, but then there's something like Schindler's List. It's predominantly shot in black and white, a choice that Arnheim would obviously praise, but then there's this moment. My intuition tells me that introducing color here is wildly artistic. It feels like Spielberg is trying to say something with this odd choice. Maybe it's about this character's state of mind, or the important symbolism of youthful children. But whatever conclusion you come to, it's engaging that same representational art itch that Scruton praises. Yet, according to Arnheim, this choice of introducing color brings the film closer to reality. Therefore, it should be less artistic. Similarly, take the film Gravity. It's notorious for its artistic use of sound. Alfonso Cuarón chooses to open the movie with a reminder that in space, there is no sound. Then, as the film unravels, we notice that the only sound played is dialogue, music, and sounds coming from the objects the protagonist touches. It gives this profound account of this character's experience. We feel more in the head of this character, and we feel like even we are in the vacuum of space. It's an experience that is only given justice by watching the movie itself. Yet once again, Arnheim would still find the introduction of sounds to be problematic. He'd prefer sound to never be introduced in the first place. So here's where Gaut tweaks Arnheim's position to make more clear how movies have the capacity for meaningful artistic choice. It's not film's inherent limitations from reality that creates artistic potential. Instead, it's where film has variable divergence. It's all the qualities of film that an artist can adjust, where they can choose how much to diverge or how much to match reality. But it's important to note that these divergences are kind of meaningless if they're fixed. We've talked a lot about a movie's rectangular screen. Having the world confined to a rectangle is definitely different from reality, but you probably wouldn't call this divergence an opportunity for art because it's just this fixed requirement, this prerequisite for watching a movie. The moment you start to mess with that frame, you're probably shifting the movie experience into something completely not movie-like. But in focusing on the variable divergences from reality, what the artist can actually play with, that's where we get art. So as we saw in Schindler's List, the introduction of color allows a filmmaker to make artistic choice in how much they choose to change reality. Within this broad range of the absence of color to its introduction, the filmmaker is given the choice of when to change it, of how to change it. And this makes the audience ask why the artist changed it. In The Last Jedi, that crescendo of sound building and rising to a sudden silence. It's an artist playing within that range of variable divergence from reality. We can now even begin to see how uniquely the filmmaking artist can play with something like space and time. We see how Stanley Kubrick creates an impossibly winding road, a space that's been proven to be possible in the real world. And that's all because film has this capacity to jump through space between shots, to construct a space, to mold reality in a way that realistically just can't exist. The same way David's proportions are impossible, the same way Van Gogh's spiraling sky can't exist, so too can the filmmaker construct something unreal in its space. Then you get Christopher Nolan's Memento, which I've personally spent weeks uncovering just how it constructs this unreal passage of time to engage the audience in this truly transcendent experience. The film's reversed time structure forces audiences to experience the film's story backwards, to try to uncover what exactly is being depicted, and to rise above our strictly forward-moving reality. Not only does this create a novel experience, but it's all about expressing the world view of the amnesiac, of short-term memory loss.
I'm sorry, I should have explained. I have this...
You did explain, Lenny.
It's expressive, just like any other representational art. But no painting can play with time. No statue can play with time. And that's because film has this unique capacity for an artist to modify time as they please. This variable divergence that the artist treats as his playground. Under Arnheim's view, you'd be pressed to try to frame this unique capacity as strictly a limitation. Like movies are limited to an untethered passing of time. No, this is a capacity, an ability to fundamentally warp the world with artistic vision, to express something different from the real world, to truly represent something artistic. So that's how film stakes its claim as an art form. To say it just captures reality without artistic influence while compelling is really a mischaracterization of the filmmaking process. As we've seen, there's a ton of choices that the filmmaker can make before and after hitting that record button. It's written with intention in the same vein as painting or any other art form. I personally am willing to concede that I think painting has a lot more of that intentionality just written into it. And that's most evident by the fact that anyone can take a decent photo with their iPhone and not many people can make a decent painting. That being said, this shouldn't discredit all the unique choices you can still make as a photographer or as a filmmaker. As we've seen with Arnheim and Gaut, there are tons of ways to play with these uniquely captivating variable divergences to create masterpieces. Masterpieces that aren't just masterpieces because of the stories they tell, but the unreality they express, the artist's vision. This neo-Arnheimian argument for art opens the door to a very nuanced interpretation of individual movies' artistry. But you may have also noticed that in all the films I mentioned during the artistic section, there seems to be an outlier. Our formulation of the artistic permits even the most commercialized movies to be artistic in their own right. And it feels off to place Thor: The Dark World right alongside Rodin and Picasso. Clearly, we have many more questions to answer. Can one movie be more artistic than another? Is that defined by how many artistic choices they make, or by how much they play within their range of divergences from the real? If we seem to be focused on film's potential divergences from the real, does that mean we we could create a list of all the ways that film could be different? Does that mean that film has a limited range of artistic expression? How does that compare to other art forms and their own kinds of limited ranges? I'm already getting way too excited thinking about it, but seeing as this video is long enough, I'll have to save it for another time. Regardless, I hope I've made clear just how filmmaking went from a simple children's toy to a medium lacking art, and finally to the art form it deserves to be. Thanks for watching.